Good afternoon, everyone. This is Christina Tanaschuk, Executive Editor of Homeland Security Today magazine, bringing you a special webinar about financial preparedness during FEMA's National Preparedness Month. As many of you know, September is recognized by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security as a month for our citizens to prepare for disasters, and certainly as COVID has illustrated, for any type of emergency. So for all those folks who haven't been saving for a rainy day because they thought rain would never happen, we are now being inundated by hurricanes, pandemics, you name it, and it's coming. So we thought it was very timely and appropriate to discuss the most unfun part of preparedness, which is the financial preparedness. With us today, we're really happy to welcome Brian Haney, and he is a good friend to our nonprofit association, in addition to the association world, and is also a specialist in insurance and financial solutions for private companies as well as associations. But we've gotten to know him through his volunteer and nonprofit work on behalf of teaching and helping folks understand financial preparedness, financial responsibility, and certainly ultimately taking care of their families. So he's the founder of his firm, the Haney Company, and he's always been passionate about educating and empowering communities and consumers to achieve financial success. So we're very excited to welcome him to discuss a bit about 5 steps that you can take to be financially prepared for any emergency. Welcome, Brian.
Christina, thanks for having me. Privileged to be here. I'm very excited about this topic, and I know we're going to cover a lot of ground, so hopefully everybody's got their notepads out ready to write some stuff down.
Well, and this video will be available on HSToday's website in perpetuity, and so what I'll do is I'll shoot over to our slideshow and get us started having a good conversation around the 5 points that we believe can really help your family in time of a disaster. So what we did is we did some research and we talked to some financial professionals in addition to Brian, and really asked, what do people need to do to avoid financial disaster? And we kind of boiled it down to 5 key steps. And so the first one is to really assess and know your critical expenses. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it continues to surprise me when I look at some of the macro data that's out there and a lot of the stuff that we pay attention to as financial industry professionals about how few people have an actual budget. It's astonishing. Well south of 40%. It ranges anywhere between, depending on what demographic numbers you're looking at, as low as 22% to as high as the mid to high 40s. So at least 1 in 2 people in America, regardless of affluence or education or anything, does not have an actual budget. And so that to me is emblematic of really why we're starting with point number 1, is that how can you be prepared for anything if all of the things that you spend on, regardless of what you're taking in, is kind of not in your control. There's very little hope if you don't feel like you have a firm grasp on your own expenses and are making choices about them on a month-over-month basis, not kind of reacting. And so, yeah, I mean, really, this is the key place, I think, to start. And the word budget tends to come across, it's not always received the best. And so I try to use other descriptions of it that maybe people find a little bit more palatable. I think the word I like to use is just control. How can you feel and take measurable control over your financial house? Because I think a lot of times we help a lot of people when we kind of hear similar thematic things that people share with us. And a lot of people feel very stressed out financially. Again, regardless of their life situation, how much they make, et cetera, it's a stressful thing. And when we kind of drill down into where a lot of that comes from and where those emotions come from is that lack of control and feeling like too many components of what happens on a monthly or a yearly basis are kind of unexpected.
Right, absolutely. And I think knowing your critical expenses also gets down to if you quote lost your job or you lost your significant income, what part of your budget is truly critical. So I think it's assessing, your mortgage, your utility bills, some of your grocery bills, what are the necessities, the critical expenses that you must meet to survive. So that's kind of an assessment of that first, and then walking out, you learn more about, what you spend going out to eat or what you spend on shopping or whatever. But getting that plan and getting really to know what is critical can help you decide and plan for how much you need in case there is an emergency that wipes you out for 6-7 months.
No, I couldn't have said it better. You're absolutely right. And that, I think it's that must have versus want to or nice to. And
Exactly.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head, and things that, absolutely have to get paid are certainly the things that have to be prioritized and then planned for. And not to suggest that some of the other things aren't also important, but they're not if they're not the criticals.
Right,
And
they're
so,
not on the survival
yep,
list. Yeah,
exactly.
and then this does provide a baseline for how much you want to have in savings once you know your critical expenses. And it may not be as daunting as it may sound in the beginning.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think sometimes when, we hear the general statements of, you need to have this many months or percentage or what have you of income put aside, that feels scary. That's why I like what you're talking about. Look at it on a much more granular and practical level and start in this way. Say, okay, this is critical. 1 month without enough for these expenses exposes me in ways that I can't be exposed financially. So exactly. I have to now systematically at least address this. And usually that kind of is a much more effective starting frame to then build and, get the habit going to put more away. But yeah, when somebody says, oh, you should have 6 months of your income, for a lot of people, that seems like a complete fantasy because, that number is just massive to them. And it's not to suggest you can't get there, but, if we're starting at ground zero, this is absolutely where we got to start.
Exactly. So the first point is know your critical expenses. The second is to stock up your emergency savings. And hindsight's 2020. As we give this webinar, we hope we're not making anyone upset about saying this. But I know that a lot of disaster folks and probably even your parents have been saying, I've been saying this for years, because it's true. To be prepared and to have a savings account is incredibly important. And unfortunately, once again, COVID has reminded us that, a disaster may not be a hurricane. It may not be something expected at all. And that is the nature of a disaster or an emergency. And so your individual savings is what is going to bridge that gap for you if God forbid you lose your job or you lost your house or something that really puts your family into dire straits. The other piece of this is that I think many of you may know that FEMA has been working very hard to build community resilience. And that community resilience is based upon each individual person and family realizing that we all play a role in the resilience of our communities. And so each of us preparing for our own families first allows us to be prepared and to help others.
No, which is wonderful to see in the ways that on a national level we're able to try to engage in that community building process and reminding each one of us that the personal responsibility part isn't just about making sure we as a family unit are okay, but that the more family units that are okay in a community allows the community to not just survive, but potentially thrive and then be of benefit to others. And so there's a domino effect that I find when And frankly, I think our motto, or one of our mottos at the Haney Company, is a rising tide lifts all ships. So we want to work with people to get the collective tide to rise, because then everybody wins. And that's kind of that mentality, right? It's not just, I want to make sure that, I've got to be okay, I've got my savings. Obviously, that has to happen, but to know that that can actually benefit other people beyond yourself, just because you're in a much more empowered and freed up place if God forbid something happens to you. Because a lot of times, and we're seeing this, front and center on probably a regular basis now, as the pandemic has gone on for the better part of this year. Where do people go when when they run out? And they do start to reach out to community, family members, friends, et cetera. And thankfully, I think we're seeing a lot of communities and people coming together. You don't want to be necessarily the one that has to do the reaching out. A lot of times you'd rather be in the position where you're able to help out. And so this is a real important point. Building off of the first one, I think, this is taking it to the next level. And I think the advice piece, or what do I try to make sure people see and look at when it comes to savings, is that this is as much about triage and priority as anything else. And so, and if you don't mind, Christine, I'll give you a very good example of something that I see play out pretty regularly. A lot of times someone, either a couple or young adults or what have you, will say, we're trying to figure out, the whole rent versus own thing. When is it the right time for us to buy a house? We really want to buy a house, or we want to go to this rental property, or whatever it is. And I have to almost always pause that conversation and come back to some of these main points. Well, how much do you have just set aside in savings? Before we rush into a particular lifestyle commitment of either a rental amount or a mortgage amount, let's be sure that we have these foundational building blocks. If you're saying you don't even have a down payment, then I don't think that it's time to buy something. Or, if you're looking to rent and it's stretching you on a month-to-month basis, but you still think you're going to be okay, maybe you don't need to be stretched that way. So these are some of those other things where this triage and this personal responsibility, sometimes you got to step back, because not having this means you're completely exposed.
I think a lot of people get exasperated when they hear this, because they consider savings very difficult, and they're living frugally already. I know there are a lot of apps and financial aids that help you kind of save without thinking about it. I know Acorn is one of them. Acorn kind of rounds up your purchases and puts 30, 40 cents away. And over time, you build up thousands of dollars. And many times people don't think about the small ways, like even finding the change in pants and things when you're doing laundry and putting all that money in a bucket in the laundry room. And all of a sudden, you have quite a bit of money in little places. Do you have any suggestions on kind of easy, not so comprehensive ways of people just beginning to save and seeing how possible it is, and maybe doubling that or growing that over time?
Well, you actually named a few already, so I'm glad that there are definitely a lot of savings apps out there, and if most of them don't cost you anything. So definitely avail yourself of one that fits you and that you like and helps. I usually just kind of, it's a comical way of seeing it, but I try to get people in the mentality of, the whole take a penny, leave a penny concept. So why does that matter? What does that mean? Say for any ways that you're going to be taking a penny out and doing something for yourself, try to put that same penny away for yourself, so that way you can make sure you do it. So just from the mentality standpoint, I want to try to help create this idea. We have, I think part of this is, and I want to address this. We have a very consumerist mentality that we don't think about. So we do a lot of things that subconsciously, there might be a part of us that if we stepped away, would say, wait a minute. But our culture is just a very instant gratification, keep up with the Joneses, appearances, and so let's just recognize that those are forces that are at play that make us tend to just kind of make certain buying decisions on the spur in the moment or without really thinking. It's so easy to just go in on my Starbucks app and get Starbucks, and it's automatically reloaded. So I don't really think about how many times I'm reloading this or what I'm doing or whatever, and it's almost like it's not real, right? And by the way, I love Starbucks, so if that's, I'm not trying to, not poo-pooing that, but again, it goes back to that mentality first. So, what are some of the things that we can try to train ourselves now to do to start setting things aside for ourselves? And I mean, I love what you said, whether it's an app, whether it's literally a physical bucket that you set up for yourself, or whether it's just the concept of, for every cup of coffee, I'm going to put the same amount that I spent on coffee into a certain account. It can be as little and as easy as that. But once the habit is there, I see the critical thing is it's all about the habit. Once the habit's there, it's surprisingly easier to build. But usually the hardest thing is to actually get the habit in place. So, whatever that looks like for you, especially if you're one of the people that would say, this is hard for me, then let's find a way to get a habit in place over a 60-day period of time, see how much success you can have. And then, man, once it's going, we can really stretch that to get you to a much, much better place.
Absolutely. So that's the second idea, is to stock up your emergency savings, but not to be overwhelmed by the thought of that. Use apps, use some of the many financial resources available to you that are free that will help you start saving in a small way that gets you more confident and that's easier. So a bucket in the laundry room, an app, reach out to your financial institution, because most of them do have a lot of resources on financial preparedness. So the next is, of course, planning the use of credit. So I think all of us use credit, or pretty much all of us. I don't know, Brian, if you have any statistics about how much people spend on their credit cards, but credit cards and even an open home equity line on your home can be very invaluable resources in a time of an emergency, especially if you plan it, because approaching it with maxed out credit cards isn't going to help you much. But if you have credit available to you, you can decide some of the expenses that your credit can help you with, including your mortgage. So what advice do you have on planning the use of credit in an emergency, Brian?
Well, I think the first word in this point is the most critical, and that is plan. So when it comes to using credit in any form, prepare and plan ahead. Don't just pull it out because it's easy and it's there. That's where I think, and the statistics are unfortunately not great when it comes to the level of unsecured debt per family household across the landscape of the U.S. Goes back to kind of what we were saying, and unfortunately there's too much of this consumeristic culture. So I think not only that, but I mean, you can see this even at like collegiate levels, where credit card companies are kind of openly inviting students to say, hey, get a free hat and get a credit card. And it's kind of like nobody really ever thinks about what we're developing in terms of a habit, or what kind of mentality we're setting ourselves up for failure if we're not spending the same amount of time saying, if you get this credit card, make sure you're also good at saving. No, we're just kind of, we're allowing ourselves to get things now that we don't have the money for, thinking that we can just pay it off later, and we're just paying a little bit of interest. So that I hope, I'm not trying to come down too hard on credit, but just credit has its place, but it shouldn't be, again, something that controls you, or is something that you're not able to at least quantify how much it's costing you. Because, for a lot of expenses, the most effective way to financially win for yourself, whether it's, savings, building resources, and frankly, just basic wealth building habits, are to manage the credit component and actually how much you spend in interest. They've done some really macro level studies. it is astounding. Consumers spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest payments to credit cards over their lifetime. That's enough to probably help send a kid to school, right? When we're talking about education and the costs there. So planning the use of credit is really important. Now, credit is also something that it's not always easy to have. So you want to treat having good credit for yourself and credit available, you want to treat that very, very seriously. You want to take that seriously because in an emergency, God forbid you have your reserves, but things just continue to make it more difficult, or you're having to, that maybe there's a definable period of time where you might be financially struggling, but that has an end to it. Back to your point, what you were saying, Christine, is that then gives you the ability to say, well, all right, maybe I need to use these expenses and we'll use credit for that because I can create a repayment plan for myself and I'll use cash for these other things. But if you don't have that ability, or you're maxed out, or you don't have very good credit, and then when you need to try to get some, that's the time when you're trying to find out that you don't have good credit and you can't. That's where that whole, it all goes back to planning.
Right. So I think there are two steps to that planning. One is to kind of assess what credit you have,
Yep.
looking at your credit report. Many of those are free now. Experian offers their website that lets you see your credit score all the time and see what's impacting and what's not. And then after assessing that, taking a look at the different types of credit available. So for example, one is the home equity line on your home that you would have available but not used. So when a disaster happens, you would always have that credit in reserve at a very low interest rate. So that's the other bonus of kind of a line of credit on your home. Of course, secondly, there are credit cards. So your Visa, MasterCard, Amex, all of those are potential assists in a time. But as Brian mentioned, the interest rates can be quite high. So using those in your plan would be kind of more of a last resort. And then there are other, opening new credit lines. That's also a possibility even in a disaster, depending on your credit score. So planning and managing those aspects of a financial disaster management plan is very, very important. So planning the use of your credit can be very helpful. The fourth is to, of course, review your insurance, because the last thing you want to do is find out that you thought you were covered for something and you're actually not. So Brian, I know you're quite the expert on this. So if you have some points on what people should look for in their insurance and what things they should reassess now that we're seeing more storms and more disastrous situations, no matter what you blame it on, the weather or COVID or whatever, what types of insurance points should they be looking for, and should they be buying additional coverage?
So this is one of those moments where I could say, hey, Christina, how much time do we have, right? Because we could certainly stay on this for a long time, but I won't do that. I think the first thing that I want to start when it comes to insurance, and what I hope has actually played out, and a lot of people that will be listening to this or watching this will agree with this. What the pandemic's really done when it comes to insurance is it's highlighted that it's not just this kind of feeling. Insurance is not a necessary evil. Insurance can actually be extremely important, and so having the right kind of insurance now matters more than ever, because there's a lot of people that, realize, oh my gosh, I didn't have what I needed. Whether you're a business owner and you wish you had business interruption, whether you're somebody who's had either been on the front lines or had some exposure issues, or, has been out of work because of some physical health concerns during this time, and you wish you had disability, right? So what we've gone through now probably really reveals the most important part of insurance, which is you need to have insurance there to make the claims that you might be at risk for, right? Insurance matters the most when you need a check from them. So I think why I take the time to say it that way is that there's a lot of the challenge that I've seen as a professional in the industry with the way insurance is advertised and discussed kind of in the market. And it's a lot of, hey, 15 minutes will save you 15%. It's this kind of de minimis, race to the bottom, don't spend too much, only pay for what you need. Well, the story that's telling you is to buy cheap, and you can probably disregard a lot of other things. Well, I'm here to tell you that's probably not the best way that I would say you should approach insurance. And so what we try to do is go through and say, well, what are the things that what are you really at risk for? Whether it's you talking about your home, right? What are the things that could happen that would cause a significant claim? And let's figure out what that looks like. Yourself, I think this is an area where a lot of people don't look at the insurance that is tied to your health as well as we should. Life insurance and disability are extremely important, and not just, life insurance, God forbid something happens to you, but structuring it the right way. A lot of times people don't realize you may have the ability to structure life insurance and actually have it also be an asset that could help you out in the event of an emergency. But it requires planning and using it and designing it the right way. So I think what I say is figure out, get the risk right, and the costs and the planning of it will follow. Don't just go cost first and then hope that you've built the right protection strategy from an insurance standpoint. And I think things to review are certainly, again, personal policies that either cover the things that you have or cover yourself as an individual, life, health, disability. Be looking at those things and really thinking about, back to what we're talking about, if an emergency happens, what are my deductibles? Do I have enough to cover my deductibles? What do I need to do about that? Or maybe, maybe I do. Maybe I actually have a decent amount of savings and I got a pretty low deductible. Maybe that means I can actually move that up, save myself a little bit of money because I can take on a little bit more responsibility if something happens. But that's that trade-off that if you're not really looking at it the right way, you can miss some of these fine points of insurance. And so I think that those are, please protect yourself the right way first and work with a professional that can help you do that. And then, bring the right types of policies and companies to the table. And they'll be priced appropriately. So you're not going to, if you do this right, you won't spend too much. I can tell you this, you can have bought very cheap insurance and a claim happens and all the money you save goes out the window if you're not getting the check that you need. So
have you seen some new instruments developing based on what's kind of going on in the world?
I don't know that we've seen kind of anything new come out. I think that what we're seeing is a lot of existing coverages are going to be refined. Some of the language is going to change. Some things that, maybe you wanted to have. So if you're a nonprofit organization, we'll just use great common day example, right? You wanted to get event insurance, right, for a pandemic, but maybe you didn't have that as a part of your event cancellation policy. Well, guess what? If you're trying to get new coverage, you might have an exclusion for that, right?
Yeah.
So, but again, that's okay because there still can be a lot of other things that merit, consideration. So I think I think right now is a very good time just to step away, do a risk audit for yourself, whether you're a business owner, whether you're an individual, your family, you're running a nonprofit, whatever it is. Let's just take a look at it. Let's have a very practical, pragmatic conversation about if X, Y, and Z plays out, if a disaster plays out, what are the financial ramifications and what do we want to do about that? And then that's when you can really line up insurance to work best for you.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to ask you another question, which is, probably a little tricky, but I have to ask anyway. And that is, at these times of disaster, as we're seeing with credit cards and all kinds of things, scammers are out in force. Are there any insurance scams or any things that people are trying to be sold that are really just a crock of baloney? To use a nicer word than what really
yeah, so you're absolutely right. And you're, according to a lot of this, the cyber intelligence reports that we see in the insurance intelligence reports, Cyber crime, especially whether it's phishing, a lot of that stuff has gone up by 300% since March.
Yeah.
LIMRA studies have shown that 60% of major LIMRA organizations interviewed have experienced at least 1 to 2, major kind of cyber events that they've had to fight off. So that absolutely, we are in a situation where when everybody is online now and consumers of all kinds, businesses of all kinds, we are double and triple in this virtual digital space now. The exposure, also the commensurate exposure goes up as well. So I don't think we've seen too many things necessarily kind of masquerading under the insurance flag. We have seen a lot. Again, phishing, things that are already kind of there are continuing. So be mindful of anything that's coming to you in the form of an email. That's
right.
Just, the vast majority of legitimate financial engagements you will have will not be emailing you, asking you for information, or telling you need to do something. Whether
right.
it's your bank, insurance company, a financial organization, investing, etc. That's not how it works for these very reasons. So if you're getting an email and they're asking you for things that it doesn't seem like they should be asking you for, that's red flag number one. I think then when it comes to, back to like kind of the insurance conversation, protect yourself and your data. I'm not talking about just cyber insurance if you're a business or an organization, but be mindful of yourself as a person, as your family. Institute things such as, consider getting a VPN, a private virtual network where you can protect, if you're going on open Wi-Fi, your data and your devices. Be mindful if you've got kids that are now online and learning online. There can be some serious exposure depending on how you're set up. You want to think about these things. You want to be aware that, that there's just, it's the wild, wild world out in the virtual space. And so we don't want to be naive about what that looks like. And yes, if make sure everything that comes across your desk or comes in front of you passes what I like to call the sniff test. If it doesn't smell right, reach out to, as many people as you need to, just to make sure if you're considering something that you can feel confident about it, and don't take action if you're not comfortable. If your gut's telling you no, don't. That's but again, really good insurance will only, show up when it's supposed to. And, if you have a claim situation, work and get the right help that you need in those types of situations, medical, disability, whatever it is. Don't be afraid to reach out and engage with your insurance company, because they are there to help. They aren't just there to take your premium and say, have a nice day. So reach out. There's nothing wrong with that.
That's great. Yep. So in reviewing your insurance, it's really about identifying the types of risks, and your insurance company or an insurance professional can help you identify what those risks are and make sure that you're purchasing the plans that will give you the maximum coverage and protection against any type of emergency. So 5 is to create new or more income streams. And probably some people are kind of rolling their eyes and going like, what does that mean? But there have been many, many opportunities now with the internet and the rise of independent service providers and things like Etsy, or renting a house or a room in your house. Or there are many ways to create additional income streams that can help you either build up a savings or be there in a time when you really need more money coming into the household.
Yeah, no, this is, we probably heard the term gig economy, and that still exists. Although, maybe whether it's, Uber or Lyft or stuff like that, people might be a little bit more hesitant now to be having people coming into their car. I can understand that, but that's not the only opportunity. There are now a lot of ways to, make a little bit to a lot. And so it really does depend on things that you might be good at and interested in. But, the kind of virtual and even in person, what I call contracting world has exploded. And the good thing about this is that was a trend that was already happening prior to the pandemic that has now probably accelerated considerably. So you've got a lot of ways to go out and, make, whether maybe it's a service provider. So I like to use a personal example. Is my daughter has had a pet care business, and since we live in a downtown condominium, she's made it known among the condominium that she's available to either walk dogs or house sit cats and stuff like that. And guess what? She's done really well for herself because a lot of people have had that need. Now, unfortunately, with everybody being home, we're not walking as many dogs anymore. But, that's again, an example that I hope you can consider for yourself. If there are certain things that you would be able to do or be good at, or even involve some of your family members, then there are certainly ways to kind of go about pursuing that as a small venture. And there are a lot of places that you can go. I've talked about this a lot. There's a great website resource called hiremymom.com for a lot of women that might have been professionals and kind of stepped out of the workplace. That's a great website resource as well. But that, again, another example of kind of that contracting portal, if you will, to get people engaged. So, if you like to create things, if you're artistic, if you can, if you're a handyman, there's just so many things now that people can pay you on an hourly basis, on a project basis. You can go work at getting groceries at a Whole Foods for Amazon. All the delivery opportunities that are out there. I know they're needing more delivery people. So just don't shortchange yourself. And if that's something that you think you got the time and the energy and the margin for, and you want to start to build another revenue stream, definitely take a look at it. And then there's, I think more substantial considerations like having a rental property or creating some passive income sources. And that's, probably another level. But if that is something that you have the capacity to do and maybe had never really thought about it, now can be a great opportunity because the real estate market's going to be impacted right now. And so there can be good places to go to find opportunities as well. So.
Absolutely. I think creating income streams is daunting, but at the same time, like you said, with the gig economy, there are many places to advertise your services, and sometimes something that doesn't seem like it would be that important can become critical. Like, for example, sewing masks. I mean, how many mask companies have cropped up, and those can be made kind of at home and turn a hobby or even a small business into a larger business based on assessing some of the opportunities for the things people need in times of disaster. So that and cleaning out your house, having that sale where you're selling something on some of the web platforms that make selling things very easy. So the other idea is, as soon as you do see something coming down the pike is to create new income streams so that you can either funnel that money into savings or just keep yourself moving forward so that you still are able to make your mortgage payment or pay for all the things that we said you've determined are absolutely critical to survival.
Yep.
So finally, we wanted to put up a resource page for you just to take a look, because FEMA has spent a tremendous amount of time and certainly established a lot of great resources on ready.gov. Today, we've been focusing on financial preparedness. And so on the bottom of your screen, you can see ready.gov financial preparedness. So you can take a look at really great things like your emergency financial first aid kit, your financial preparedness toolkit, get tech ready. One of the things that FEMA and others have learned in a time of disaster is if you don't have any electricity, you can't go to the ATM. And so people without cash are really stuck. So one of the things that FEMA has provided is resources to understand, like, maybe your cash flow needs on a few months without an ATM. I mean, God forbid it's a few months, but with the loss of electricity around hurricanes and natural disasters, and certainly those hurricanes getting larger and having outages for longer, being tech ready has become very, very important. I am listing Homeland Security Today as a resource as well. We have an emergency preparedness vertical on the website where every year we ask the community to send in articles to help both communities and professionals in Homeland Security to help them prepare their communities for any eventuality. So there are a lot of good articles and resources there that can help you as well. So just as kind of a closing note, I wanted to just talk a bit about FEMA's resilience policy. It's been an incredibly good strategy for helping communities understand their own responsibility, because ultimately FEMA and the federal government are not going to be able to save you. And I think the pandemic has really brought this home. I know that some people were complaining that they only got $1,200 from the federal government because of the pandemic. But at the same time, you take that $1,200 and multiply it by how many people received it, and you see the impact on the federal government's budget. And it is not, it's not an endless source. And with the loss of taxpayers, in addition to paying out, it becomes financially impossible for the government to take care of everyone impacted by something like a pandemic or even a huge natural disaster like Katrina. It was not fiscally possible to care for every person, even if they had wanted to. So the thing that we stress here is ways that you personally can prepare your family and should, and build the resilience of your own finances in addition to helping others. So Brian, what are your parting words for our audience?
Well, I hope we covered a lot of ground, and I'm glad we were able to go through what I would consider very important and helpful building blocks. I think the most critical thing I emphasize is please seek help if you need it, and help doesn't mean that you're not able to do certain things, but there are so many ready and willing financial professionals that can just give you their 2 cents, and they're trained to do exactly that, to make sure that you achieve financial success. So now is a great time to be engaging with someone, whether it's at a bank or a financial advising practice, an insurance professional. There's a whole network of financial coaches that can help you with things just like this, like saving and getting out of debt. And there's real, and the good thing is in this kind of virtual environment is you can access so many professional resources digitally without having to go drive to somebody's office. So again, just, we cannot stress enough here. We want to see everybody succeed financially. We want this tide to rise because, this pandemic will pass, but the need to be prepared and to be financially nimble won't. And so, wherever you find yourself, hopefully you can take advantage of any one of these resources to take that next step for yourself on towards, continued financial success.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. And as you can tell, what we're really just trying to do is provide you with the tools that you need to be successful and to certainly survive and thrive through any type of emergency or disaster. Thank you for your time, Brian. And as he said, resources, there are tremendous amounts of resources that are just free. So it's not a plug for financial advisors or insurance people, not a plug for any of that. It's a plug for you to reach out and look online, or as Brian said, reach out to your bank, reach out and find out what you can be doing even in small chunks to help prepare your family for any disaster. So thank you for joining us for today. If you have any further questions or would like a follow-up webinar on any topics, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at www.hstoday.us. As always, we care about all of you and hope that we've provided you with some practical, tactical information to help you and your family. Have a great weekend and stay dry and wear your mask. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Christina.